Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to our world family. Oh, you get to see more of my room today. It's a bigger view on the camera. Oops, I just lost you. There we go. I hope everyone is doing well and has had a little bit of time to digest the mind-only school and the middle way school. I know today, not today, sorry, a couple of days ago when I was reworking this particular class, I got totally confused. Are we talking from mind only point of view, or are we talking from middle way point of view? So if you're confused, we're all in this same boat together. Hopefully, I can explain it so that it's not so confusing, both to myself and to you as well. So, with that, let me pull up my PPT. And also to remind you, we're going to postpone classes until the 17th, which will be 2 weeks from today. So I hope you don't forget everything in 2 weeks. I hope I don't forget everything in 2 weeks. But I think we'll do a short review before we start our next class, which will be, this is also confusing because we didn't have a real class. We had our question and answers last week when after I'd had my eye surgery. So we are on class 6 today of the material, and we'll be on class 7 of the material in 2 weeks' time. Okay, so I'll remind you again at the end of class, and let's start. Nah, come on. I'm just rearranging things on my screen. There we go. So I can see Nongvu and Eka and Ina, which is helpful for me so I can pace myself. I can't really see Nongvu because your face is really dark. So I can see you're there, but I can't see you to know how long it's taking you to interpret. Just so you know that. I'll watch the other two. All right, let's start with offering this pure world that we and everybody wants. You know, it seems like there's this idea that we can get what we want by hurting others to get it. You know, and it continues to be this idea that people act upon. And we're seeing it in our world, and because we're so connected through the internet, through, excuse, still have allergies, the internet and through the news, that we hear about it as it's happening. And I don't know if it's happening more or it's just that we're tuned into it more. I think our world has always had wars and conflicts, but in my own life, I don't think I have ever seen it any more than it is now. And so this is so important to create this perfect world, right? A world where violence is not the way that we get things. So let's imagine that and offer it to every being in every world to end the suffering, to end the violence. Here is the great earth, filled with the smell of incense, covered with a blanket of flowers. The great mountain, the four continents, wearing a jewel of the sun and moon. In my mind, I make them the paradise of a Buddha and offer it all to you. By this deed, may every living being experience the pure world. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Tam Niryatayami. And having offered a pure world, we go for refuge in or shelter in how to do that, how we plant the seeds, right? I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha until I achieve enlightenment. By the power of the goodness that I do in giving and the rest, may I reach Buddhahood for the sake of every living being. I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha until I achieve enlightenment. By the power of the goodness that I do in listening and the rest, may I reach Buddhahood for the sake of every living being. I go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha until I achieve enlightenment. By the power of the goodness that I do in giving and the rest, may I reach Buddhahood for the sake of every living being. So set that intention deep in your heart. For me, because it's early in the morning, it sets my intention for the rest of the day. If it's later in the day for you, it's also for the rest of your day. If it's nighttime, you're setting that intention deep in your heart to cook while you're sleeping so it grows larger and larger. Okay. It's changed this world, right? So, as I said, we're in class 6, and we're going to talk about a different or several different kinds of ways to interpret, right? This is the art of interpretation that we're studying. So, several different ways to interpret what the Bodhisattva said and what the sutra says, right? The Bodhisattva's in the sutra. So last time we covered the 3 turnings of the wheel because that's when the mind-only school, which was the mind-only school, I think it was the blue one, takes the opportunity to decide whether the Buddha was teaching something figuratively or literally, right? That's when they say, oh, Buddhists taught this sutra and this is what it meant. And he taught that sutra because our dear friend, the Bodhisattva, asked a question. So, Mind Only School is very interested in what the 3 turnings of the wheel were and what Lord Buddha said about them. And what of it are we supposed to take on face value or not? And things like that. They have, they use this sutra in which the Buddha explains the intention of all of his other sutras as their mind, as their main mind only sutra. Which so far, the whole thing, that's what we've had so far, is that whole thing. All of the questions by the Bodhisattva, the answers by the Buddha, the outcome, the decisions, right, that are made after that exchange, they all come from this famous sutra. So if you remember when back in class one, there I mentioned that there was a group of people who went to India with Geshe Michael to get these teachings from Geshe Thupten Rinchen. And Geshe Michael translated it for everyone. But before Geshe went, he had started to translate a monastic textbook on this subject. It was a very detailed and difficult text. It's all about debate. And it was about 25 pages long. When Geshe got to India, Geshe Thupten Rinchen said, I'm not teaching that book. Geshe Michael thought he was preparing, right? That he would be ahead a little bit. And so Geshe Thupten Rinchen taught the original book by Lama Tsongkhapa, which is extremely difficult. So when Geshe Michael got to this point, when he was preparing these classes, but particularly this class, today's reading was exactly the subject of the first 25 pages of the debate manual that he had started translating. So he then goes on to say, well, that saved me about 20 hours of translating because I had already done it. And so he just stuck it into our reading at the end. So it's added at the end of the reading for today. The reading for this week comes from the monastic textbook on the mind-only school and the third turning of the wheel. It addresses the question of how the three turnings of the wheel are defined. So they ask this question, how do we define the three turnings of the wheel? Do we define it by historical period? Like from what years to what years? Do we define it by content? By the order of accuracy or how important it was? Some of those, all of those, or what? That's the question. And this question comes about through our friend Bodhisattva Dundam Yandakpak asking Lord Buddha, what did you really mean? What are considered the three turnings of the wheel? In your reading, you have the information presented by Lama Tsongkhapa in a very deep way, like in Manjushri's way. And then you have this huge section in which they debate it. And in there, you get this question. Was it by time? They say, no, not only by time. So we don't call it the first, second, and third turning of the wheel, do we? Do we call it the first, second, and third turning of the wheel? I'm asking you this question. Thank you, somebody. Yes, we do call it the first, second, and third turning of the wheel. Isn't that what we've been talking about? But does it relate to time? No, it doesn't. Is that true, though? It does, but it's not the only criteria. If we were to say, does it only relate to time, then we can say no. But just saying, does it relate to time? We have to say yes to some extent. It is true that Lord Buddha, 49 days after he pretended to become enlightened, says the text, because he was already enlightened before, right? He was just showing us how to become enlightened, right? 49 days after that experience, he taught the teachings on the four Arya truths. Then only after that, like much later, like the following year, it says he started to teach the teachings on emptiness. In the monastic textbook, it's very interesting. You get some time dating in the book, which you don't get with Lama Tsongkhapa. You also get a lot of interesting details about the three turnings of the wheel. So have a read, right? So the question comes up, did everything the Buddha say during that initial period of his teaching career, let's say the first year before he got to Vulture's Peak and taught emptiness, before he started the Prajnaparamita Sutra stuff, is everything he said the first turning of the wheel? Everything he taught in that first year. We have to say no. And there's a famous example in Zhongnay. Excuse me. In the first turning of the wheel, Lord Buddha taught those five monks who, oh, let's get in focus here again. Come on. Lord Buddha taught those top five monks or five students, right, who were his first students, and they had been the mother tigress and her four cubs, right? And they became his students. And he taught these monks, these five disciples, you should wear your robes neatly and properly. Right? And he said this in the Sutra of the Tigress, which is part of the Golden Light Sutra. Which, if you did ACI 1 and 2, I'm not sure where it came in, 1 or 2, but in that first year of classes, it tells the story of Lord Buddha in a past life giving his body to a tigress and to her cubs when she was starving. And being an enlightened being, and him giving his flesh to the tigress and her cubs, he made the wish that they would become his students when he became a Buddha. So actually, they did become his first five disciples later. And that's called Nade, those five, the first five disciples. So in that first year, during the time period that we call the first turning of the wheel, Lord Buddha is talking to his disciples shortly after his very first teaching, which covered the four Arya truths. He's teaching this famous sutra. So we're at the very beginning of Lord Buddha's career, where he's advising the first five disciples. And he says you must wear your lower robe, your shamtab, in a circle. So Nade, we know, are the five. Shamtab is the lower circle. Lumpur, it can mean circular, but sometimes it's spoken nicely or literally meaning a round skirt. So you may not know, but the ordained Sangha's lower robe is a circle. And there's a very proper way to put it on over your head, and there's reasons for doing that. And then you have to take this circle and you have to make your folds on this side and your folds on that side, and then tie it up and wear it neatly. You wear it neatly exactly for the same reason we wear anything neatly, which is to not have people turn away from us. We want to look appealing to others. So he says to them, I keep feeling like I have to sneeze. Oh, there. He says to them, hey, you guys, don't to forget to wear that robe, your nice lower robe, that circle around your body that you wrap around it. Don't forget to wear it nicely. Wear it nicely so that you can attract others to the Dharma. That's not surprising that Lord Buddha would teach this as one of the first things that he taught, right? He had just taught the four Arya truths. So it's in the historic period of his very first teachings. But is it part of the first turning of the wheel? In mind only, is it part of the first turning of the wheel? We went through the first turning of the wheels, right? In our last class. It is not considered by the mind only school to be part of the first turning of the wheel. Why? Because it's not related to the Bodhisattva's question about whether or not certain kinds of things exist by definition. So remember, we have to distinguish between the first turning of the wheel in general and the first turning of the wheel that we are talking about when we're talking about the mind only favorite sutra. So this statement, be sure to wear your lower robe in a neat circle. Is it or is it not the first turning of the wheel? It's not. So he didn't teach it first? It's a trick question. Yeah, he did teach it first. And it doesn't deal directly with the four Arya truths. It doesn't deal directly with things existing by definition. Yet, in regards to the Mind Only Sutra, why would they say we don't care? We're not worried about that statement. Does the Bodhisattva worry about the robe statement? Is that what the Mind Only school is concerned about? Of course not. So, is it the first turning wheel for the Mind Only school? Not really. It doesn't qualify as part of the first turning of the wheel in this school. Remember this point. We have to distinguish between the first turning of the wheel in general and the first turning of the wheel that we are talking about when we're talking about the mind only school's favorite sutra. The mind only school doesn't care about the robe thing. You know, the Bodhisattva is not concerned about it. He's concerned about, is it a life or death situation? How things exist. Isn't this the question that we're asking? How things exist by definition or not? Or do they? When the Buddha says, hey guys, don't forget to wear your robes in a circle neatly. No, we're not concerned about whether that exists by definition or not. But is it one of the first things in the first turning of the wheel for the mind-only school? In general, they might lump it in there, but it's not part of the philosophical first turning of the wheel. It's not what the Bodhisattva was sweating over when he asked his question of Lord Buddha. Therefore, it doesn't qualify as part of the first turning of the wheel in this school. By the way, those of you who are learning Tibetan, this she means thus did he speak, which I think is cool to know. So the second turning of the wheel. In the second turning of the wheel, you basically said that nothing has any nature of its own, Lord Buddha. You said nothing starts, nothing stops, everything is in a state of peace, everything is in a state of nirvana. So what did you mean when you said nothing has a nature of its own? I thought that was cute. If there was a sutra that Lord Buddha spoke during the middle part of his teaching career, and if it doesn't make some statement like nothing exists by definition, nothing has any reality, nothing exists truly, nothing exists from its own side. If it doesn't say that, even though it was spoken during the second period of the wheel turning, right, the second period of his teaching, would it be considered the second turning of the wheel in this school? From the point of this sutra, would it? Let's go back to last week. Especially from the point of view of the Drupten. Do you remember what the Drupten is? We had it last class. The outcome, thank you. Yeah. It's the conclusion, the outcome of this interchange between Lord Buddha and the Bodhisattva, the exchange. You know, the Bodhisattva comes up to Lord Buddha and says, in the first turning of the wheel, you said everything exists by definition, or you kind of implied that. In the second turning of the wheel, you said nothing exists by definition. What did you mean? And Lord Buddha is like, what do you mean? I'm not crazy. Would I say everything exists by definition? No. we've got to divide things. And so the third turning of the wheel comes about through this discussion. And it's called Lekche Chunkor, the wheel in which we divide things. So Lord Buddha says, we divide things. I didn't mean it about those things. They do exist by definition. And I didn't mean about those other things. They don't exist by definition. So like that, right? And then he says, those blanket statements I made, they do and they don't. Some things do and some things don't. What I really meant was two different things. I had two different things in my mind when I did that. So we have to ask the question, why did Lord Buddha say the simplest presentation first, the most profound presentation second, and then he had to backtrack in the third? Why doesn't he just shift the order? You know what? There is a sutra that says that's what he did. And we'll talk about that later. It's pretty cute. Say Sungyel Gido. Sungyel Gido. Sungyel means, well, Gel means king, and Do means basically sutra, right? And Sungyel Gido means the king of the mystic words sutra. So it's somebody's name, king of mystic words, and he requests a sutra. This is the middle ways, this hat, right? This is the middle ways ordering of the three turnings of the wheel. And it proceeds from the idea that the three turnings of the wheel must each be higher than the preceding one. They say the real order of the three turnings of the wheel should have been, number one, Denshe Chunkor. Den means truth, Shi means four. Should put that up here for you. There we go. And Chunkor means turning the wheel of the Dharma. So they say not mind only, middle way says, let's put the teaching of the four Arya truths as number one. Is that anything different from the mind only school? No, says Eka. I could see her shaking her head. No, it's not. And remember, who wrote this sutra? It's a sutra. Who writes sutras? Lord Buddha writes sutras. So, number one, the turning of the wheel where Lord Buddha taught the four Arya truths, Den Shi Chunkor. Number one. Number two, they say, the turning of the wheel where Lord Buddha made fine distinctions between what does and does not exist by definition. Remember, this is a reordering by the middle way school. Some things do and some things don't exist by definition. Constructs don't exist by definition. Pens do exist by definition. And so does the third attribute, emptiness, Yongju. So in this sutra, the King of Mystic Words Sutra, it says, let's put that as number two in response to your question. So they moved it from number three to number two because it's less correct. You know, it's like, let's save the correct, the big stuff for the last. First, you tell them everything exists by definition, and then you tell them some stuff does and some stuff doesn't. And then, and only then, when they're really ready, you pop on them that, hey, you know what? Nothing exists by definition. So the third turning of the wheel, in which Lord Buddha taught that nothing exists by definition. Tseni, mepe, chunkor. Tseni, mepe, chunkor. Right? Tseni means definition. Mepe means it doesn't exist. And chunkor is the turning, okay? So the turning that nothing exists by definition. And so in the King of Mystic Words Sutra, it says, let's move it to number three because it's the most correct. And so now we have a very natural progression. So number one, first you tell them everything's suffering. You can get out of it. Don't worry. Everything's cool. It all exists by definition. Then later you say, by the way, I was just being figurative. You should understand that some things are what this thing we call emptiness, and they don't exist by definition. Although there are some things that exist by definition, like pants and pens, you know, my sweater. Anybody can see that. Tell me we don't think like that. We know about emptiness, but yeah, we think this glass of water exists by definition, or at least the glass does, right? These things are made in a factory, right? Then the student, when they're mature enough, finally, when they're mature enough, you tell them the real ultimate way things exist. You give them the third turning of the wheel. Guess what? This hat, this glass, me, you, don't exist by definition either. This pen, it doesn't have its own identity from its own side. So in the King of Mystic Words Sutra, this would be a really nice progression. Don't you agree? Mind only doesn't agree. Mind only would say, are you crazy? When he said nothing exists by definition, that's when he was half right. Later, he got to the real truth, which is that this exists by definition, but my idea of this or that doesn't. So for mind only, the order should have been the old way. Not much correct, halfway correct, totally correct. So mind only school likes the sutra by Dundam Yang Dak Pak, right? Who of the four great Indian schools likes the King of Mystic Words Sutra, which lists them in this order that we have here today? Anybody want to take a guess? Is it the mind only school? We just said that they like the other sutra. Who likes this sutra? Why did Lord Buddha teach different sutras that said different things? Middle Way likes this sutra. Oops, we slipped into Middle Way, right? If your mind only school, the order has to be the definition, and then you make the fine distinctions. They say that's increasing correctness. They say it's only the smartest disciples who could take the last one, who could understand the last one, which happens to be us mind-only people. Take the Majjhimika hat off. Go back to your notes from last week. Who were the disciples for whom each of the three turnings of the wheel were designed for? Who was the first turning of the wheel designed for? Anybody remember? Hinayana. Yes, thank you. Somebody's studying, yay, and has a good memory. We're referring to a philosophical mindset or anyone who has a certain idea about emptiness. It doesn't matter whether they're Tibetan or Burmese or from Sedona. It's a way of thinking, Hinayana, right? So how can we measure whether we're thinking that way? Do you have negative thoughts? Anybody in here not have negative thoughts? Raise your hand, please. Right? What was the worst part of your day today or yesterday? At that point, you were more Hinayana, right? The more Hinayana we take things as self-existently and we get into fights and arguments, right? You can't get angry at a thing or upset or jealous if you understand that thing is empty, that it is a luminous image coming from you, from how you treated people in the past. Impossible. And that's why we study emptiness. So this first turning of the wheel was taught for those people who have that kind of mindset. It is out there. That person is out there. And that's causing me to be upset. They are causing me to be upset. So that first turning of the wheel was taught for us, right? If we're in that mindset. Who was the second turning of the wheel taught for? But nobody asked in what school, right? Because it's different in mind only in middle way school. And I'll agree with you. Yes, it was taught for Mahayana, for Madhyamika. We're talking about that things are empty of any existence from their own side, right? Mind only school, second turning of the wheel. Lord Buddha taught this for people who had perfectly entered the Mahayana. Again, we're quoting the Sutra of the Mind Only School. Lord Buddha's commentary on what I meant when I taught all the other sutras. And specifically the chapter requested by this very curious bodhisattva. So that's the first and second turnings of the wheel. What about the third turning of the wheel? Here we've got Lord Buddha and the bodhisattva asking his question with a few disciples under a Bodhi tree. They were pretty lucky, right? It's like remembering 30 years ago when there were like 10 of us sitting around an apartment with Geshe Michael while he worked. Pretty fortunate. We were the fortunate ones. We are the fortunate ones. And now there are thousands of fortunate ones in the world that he's able to reach. So here's the third turning of the wheel. There is a textbook writer from Sarah May, which is our home monastery, right? And his name is Kedrup Tempa Darge. You probably have heard of him. And what he says is, okay, what does the sutra mean when it says everybody for the third turning of the wheel? Remember that when we went through last Thursday, each turning of the wheel, the third turning was meant for everybody. The turning of the wheel of fine distinctions. And doesn't that seem a little odd that Lord Buddha would say that? Lord, so somehow the most advanced turning of the wheel, you get to be Hinayana and still hear it. No, Lord Buddha says it doesn't mean that at all. And I taught it to you wrong that day. It says people of every way. So, as a good student, I'd say, well, what is he talking about? Which is exactly what Kedjo Tempa Darge asks. If it wasn't designed for Hinayana people. And he goes into this really cool thing. He asks, how do you really define the first turning of the wheel? Anastasia Komenko, there's a note for you in the chat. So, where was I? Let me go back. Got distracted there. Oh, he says, let's define the first turning of the wheel. It was the turning of the wheel that was designed for students who couldn't understand how the three attributes, remember them, applied to the emptiness of a person. Lord Buddha taught it for people who could only understand the three attributes in regard to a kind of simplified emptiness. Kuntaks, Shenwangs, and Yongdrups, right? Lord Buddha simplified it because they couldn't understand the ultimate one. And we say that the emptiness of a person is easier to perceive than the emptiness of other things. And they couldn't understand that. Generally speaking, the first turning of the wheel is for anybody who could get the simple version of emptiness. And that makes them Hinayana. In this presentation, we always have to clarify things, right? So we have this bodhisattva who comes up and tries to clarify things. He's smart. He's smart enough to understand it without, or they're smart enough to understand it without having to have clarification. On your homework question 7. It says, after deciding that the that other more extensive definitions may be problematic, the great textbook writer of Sarah May Tibetan Monastery, who lived 1493 to 1568, by the way, gives a very revealing general definition of what the first turning of the wheel of the Dharma is. And he says, Korlo sumpo gangrung du gyurpe tekmin gido. A sutra of the lower way that belongs to any one of the three turnings, the historical periods, right, of the wheel. This is the ultimate definition of the first turning. We accept this definition as the best one. Lower way is referring to a sutra which talks about emptiness in a simpler way for those who need it. It's not referring to Hinayana practitioners who may have an excellent understanding of emptiness. Kedrup Tempa then goes on to say the second turning of the wheel is then considered to be any sutra taught for those greater way disciples who could understand emptiness without having to hear the explanations given in the Sutra of the True Intent. Interpreters, should I repeat that? Let me repeat it because it was a mouthful. It's like, where do I break it up? So the second turning of the wheel, according to Kedrup Tempa Darge, which we agree with, is any sutra taught for those greater way disciples who could understand emptiness without having to hear the explanations given in the Sutra of the True Intent. And then the third turning of the wheel. Any sutra taught for those greater way disciples who needed to hear the explanations given in the Sutra of True Intent in order to understand emptiness correctly. Got it? Interpreters, you okay? Okay. So in the third turning of the wheel, Lord Buddha is repackaging his message for a particular audience. And guess what? As teachers, we have to do the same. As a teacher, and I must say it's much harder on Zoom to do this than in person. You have to judge the level of your audience. Of course, to the best of your ability, right? And then you design the message to their capacity. Of course, you always need to link seeds and being moral to your explanation of emptiness. They always go hand in hand. Right? The relationship between emptiness and your projections forced on you by how you treated others in the past must be linked in your explanations. So what's this got to do with saying that the third turning of the wheel was designed for students of all yanas, both Hinayana and Mahayana? Right? The lesser vehicle and the greater vehicle. Kedrup Tempa Darge says, once you say that with a little help from the Bodhisattva, they can get the deeper form of emptiness. That's what it means to be for both vehicles, both ways. They got the easier one, and then they got the Mahayana presentation and the Hinayana presentation, right? They've entered both vehicles, and that's what it really means. So it doesn't mean people of every vehicle. It means that they've entered, understanding the lower way of emptiness and the higher way of emptiness. What about the second turning of the wheel? Any teaching Lord Buddha gave during the middle part of his career. And according to Kedrup Tempa Darge, it started like a year after, it's like his second year. So if Lord Buddha didn't talk about the fact that nothing exists by definition, right? Talking about that clearly or directly during that particular teaching, we don't count it as part of the second turning of the wheel. In the thing that the Bodhisattva figures out later, okay? What did he say? He said, oh, Lord Buddha, I get it. You didn't mean what you said in the first turnings of the wheel. You meant what you said in the third turning wheel of the wheel, which is now. And Lord Buddha says, right. When we talk about the three turnings of the wheel from this point of view, at that moment of his realization, then we're restricting the second turning of the wheel to the statements that Lord Buddha made. Those crazy statements from the minority school point of view. Nothing exists by definition. Pens don't have their own identity. There's no penness coming from this thing. It doesn't have any penness. It could just as well be a chew toy. It could just as well be something to hold my hair up, right? There is no penness coming from its side. If your boss or your partner or your teacher is an irritating person, you can never be angry at another person again if you understand this. But if they are the irritating person, you're stuck in mind-only school. And it's useful to talk about this stuff. And that's why we talk about it. And that's why we talk about mind only in middle way. As we go forward in this course, classes 7 to 9, we're going to be defending middle way, Madhyamika. So what is included in the third turning of the wheel? Only those teachings where Lord Buddha clearly taught about emptiness are defined as the second turning of the wheel in terms of the outcome of the exchange, right? The Drupten. The third turning of the wheel is defined in terms of the outcome of the exchange as those teachings where Lord Buddha makes fine distinctions about whether or not certain things exist by definition. So, not everything that Lord Buddha taught in the latter part of his life qualifies as the third turning of the wheel. The third turning of the wheel is defined as that turning designed for disciples of the greater way who can't understand the emptiness of objects presented in the second turning of the wheel until they hear the outcome of the exchange presented in the third turning of the wheel about how constructs don't exist by definition. And then how dependent things in emptiness do exist by definition. So when we say that the third turning of the wheel was designed for students who have entered all three ways, it means that they have grasped both the lower way, Hinayana, and the greater way, Mahayana, even though they are really Mahayana. So I hope you're all totally confused now. Uh, yes, nothing exists by definition, according to the mind-only school. Right. If you have a mind only, if you have a middle way hat on, everything is coming from you. And mind only, we talked about it, and I asked Dr. Word about it the other day, in fact. Your mind only says everything basically is coming from you, but there's some subtle, self-existent thing out there. And because Geshe has been talking about mind only school recently, and he says, yes, they say mind only, everything's coming from you. I mean, that's kind of what mind only means, right? And he doesn't mention that there's some subtle thing out there. And so I'm like, well, Jason Kappa said, Dr. Word, what is he talking about? He's so what Dr. Word explained to me is that in the mind only school, they say that the seeds live in the kunchi, in the storehouse consciousness, in the refrigerator, and that is a self-existent thing. And that's the subtleness that they're talking about in the mind only school of something have a self-existence. The seed for the projection is in the kunchi, in the storehouse consciousness, in the refrigerator. in this little place in your heart, self-existently. But yes, they also say that your projection is coming from those seeds of how you treated others. So this helped me to understand what that subtle self-existence that mind-only school that Lama Tsongkhapa was mentioning in the mind-only school. So I just share that with you. Somebody asked, what about middle way? Nothing exists by definition? Yes, nothing exists by definition. Okay, so we've got this whole commentary, Lord Buddha's commentary on the true intent. Why did he teach it? One, he wanted us to learn to not take literally his two blanket statements in the first turning that everything exists by definition. And I'm just telling you what is written up here. And in the second turning, that nothing exists by definition, according to the mind-only school, right? Two, he wanted us to understand the nature of the three attributes. Constructs don't exist by definition, but dependent things and emptiness do. Also note, be aware that all the schools of Buddhism accept the three attributes. But they would interpret them differently. And then number three, these are the three goals. He wanted to give us a really cool way of understanding emptiness as the fact that constructs about a dependent thing don't exist by definition. It is the fact that separate karmic seeds are not producing a person who irritates me and my mind that is irritated. It is one karmic seed. We have this idea, me and the object, coming from one seed. So the emptiness of the irritating person is the fact that my mental image of her doesn't exist by definition. Okay. So these are the three goals that Lord Buddha wanted us to understand when he spoke this sutra. And then Lama Tsongkhapa takes a whole lot of time to disprove the idea of some Tibetan scholars who say that all three turnings of the wheel were meant literally. So you see, we have this whole combination. This one's figurative. No, this one's literal. Somebody else says, oh, this one's literal. No, I think that one's figurative. And then we have this other group that says, oh, they're all literal. They even say that Lord Buddha was speaking literally when he said things have some nature of their own. Why do they say that? He said it to attract non-Buddhist groups. So this group of people who said this, they were the Jongnampa school. Remember them? We talked about them before. So the Jongnampa school is referring to the essence of the ones gone that way, which is what this is. Daishin Shekpa Ningpo. Essence is Ningpo, right? Daishin Shekpa gone that way. It is a code word for Buddha nature. This is something that every one of us has. Every being has Buddha nature. And the Jongnampas say the thing Lord Buddha was talking about in the first turning of the wheel, which seems to be the least literal thing he ever said, like we would want to say was figurative, right? When he said, yes, you do have some self-nature, definitely. They say he was speaking literally. They say he was talking about that little Buddha inside of you. They are talking about like this, there is already a little Buddha inside of you, and you just have to open it up and uncover it. What is Buddha nature? Buddha nature is primarily the emptiness of our minds, of every being's mind. That's what allows us to become an enlightened being. If we had a self-existent suffering mind that could never change, if it wasn't empty of self-existence, we could never, ever, ever, ever become enlightened. So this emptiness of our mind, it's equal to the emptiness of an enlightened being's mind. And that's why it's called Buddha nature. Buddhas have it, we have it, ants have it, right? It provides the potential for us to one day see our minds as an enlightened being's mind. To think enlightened thoughts all the time. Buddha nature is not some permanent self-standing nature from its own side. But you may even hear in this day and age people saying, oh, you just have to uncover it. It's there. And of course, then you could go on believing that we do have some sort of self-existent self-nature. As I said in the beginning of class today, Geshe-la put into the reading 25 torturous pages of debate on this subject, right? Or on these subjects that we've been talking about. They're really beautiful. And if you have time, go through them. And we do have time, hopefully, in the next 2 weeks. Why? Because all the questions that come up in your mind naturally during this class are answered there. It's pretty cool. That's how they write those books. They actually anticipate our questions that come up in our mind, and then they argue them like we argue them in our own mind. So, like in this debate, wrong ideas are brought up by this someone over here, and then this other person over here argues. And then finally, somewhere in the middle, they give this straight party line. Debate is hard to read. It's because you have to remember who's talking, who's saying what. Okay. Like last night in Mixed Nuts, when Tim was presenting his book, the Tibetan says one thing, but it doesn't include who's asking questions in between, like why. It just gives you an explanation. So when Tim was doing his student translation, he put those parts in there to help us understand what the dialogue is. So somewhere in the middle of this debate, this discussion, you finally get, let's say, the straight party line. But what's cool is you don't learn a straight party line until you've had those arguments, those discussions, until you've heard all of them. Okay. For example, 10 people have come and made a very sophisticated argument about Buddha nature that is slightly wrong. And you get to see those arguments. You get to see how they develop, how they unfold. And then by the time they finish arguing, you finally already understand what Buddha nature is. So it's a nice, rich, heavy dessert, those 25 pages. It's like eating too much cheesecake. It's delicious and a lot to digest. Take it in little pieces, think about it, debate it with your friends. Right? And that, my dears, is the end of class for today. And your meditation assignment is for 15 minutes per day, analytical meditation in which you practice alternating between the way the middle school thinks of the content of the second turning of the wheel and the way the mind-only school thinks of it, with their three attributes. Okie dokie. Oh, we stuck to an hour and a half today. Yay. Let's again plant the seeds for that pure world to end the suffering in the world, right? Okay. Sashi Puki Jukshing Metok Tram Rirab Lingshi Nyende Genpadi Sange Shingdu Mikte Ulwargi Drokun Namdak Shingla Chuparshu Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamnirya Tayami Gewadi Kewo Kun Sunam Yeshe Sok Sok Shing Sunam Yeshe Lejung Wei Dampar Kuni Topar Sho. So I hope I get to see some of you at Diamond Mountain in a couple of days. If not, I will see you here in a couple of weeks.
Thank you, Venerable Gyelse, for this beautiful, beautiful teaching. Thank you for letting us understand the parts where we are still grasping these ideas of self-existent husband or self-existent people who irritate us. Thank you so much for that. And we are making a break till March 17 because now it's going to be on Wednesdays. There's actually a retreat at Diamond Mountain, Diamond Way, Bridge to the Diamond Way, part 5. This is the 5th of the 6 teachings which are preparing us to the Diamond Way teaching, which is, we hope, Geshe-la is going to teach this year. So if you missed previous 4 teachings, you still can catch up. So join this retreat. You can do it online and you can do it, even you can do it without money. You can apply for a scholarship or pay whatever you can. The link to the registration is in the chat, in Zoom chat, and it will be in your Telegram chat. Join us in this retreat, and Venerable Gyelse is going to teach there also. Thank you so much for making this teaching possible. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Venerable Gyelse, for this deep, 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 deep course. Thank you so much.
I want to also thank all of the interpreters, the ACI staff, everybody who's recording. You know, it's amazing, really, how many of us are involved, and it takes all of us to do this together. And so I am really grateful and thank you so much. And let me know how I can serve you better. And see you soon. Thank you so much. Bye bye.